here at SPY 25. My name is... Sorry. Welcome, everyone. I'm instructed to use the microphone, especially for the people online, so forgive me for repeating myself. My name is Kees Ribbens. I welcome all of you here on behalf of NIOT, the Dutch Institute for War, Holocaust and Genocide Studies. But most of all, I welcome everyone on behalf of the project Survivor-Centered Visual Narratives, in which we are one of the project partners. This public event is actually a prelude to the annual general meeting that's going to take place over the next 2 days at the Trippenhuis here in Amsterdam. And I think it's great to see that the interest in, well, the power of graphic novels is not just limited to the relatively small team of researchers that's involved in this project. So we are delighted that you've made the effort to travel here tonight to this venue. In particular, I would like to extend a warm word of welcome to Akram Al-Saud, and to Toby Damen, as well as to our Canadian colleagues, Charlotte Schalier and Andrea Webb, who jointly direct the SCVN project, and also to my NIOT colleague, Umit Ungur. Tonight we're going to talk about visualizing survivors' voices. And at the center of this is a graphic novel that has been created in the past few years. It took some time. Next year, this visual narrative will be sent out into the world as a book titled Al-Fajr, The Horror Surviving Assad's Prisons. And Al-Fajr, I'm probably not pronouncing that very correctly, sorry for that. It visualizes the gripping experiences of Akram Al-Saud, who has come to know aspects of Syria's previous regime that the average citizen here in Western Europe could not, or perhaps did not want to imagine. And I think for this very reason, comic book creator Toby Damen has made an attempt, a courageous attempt, I believe, to depict Akram's experiences as survivor in mutual agreement, and thereby making this personal history imaginable to an international readership. We are not so much going to theorize the medium of the graphic novel tonight, but we will try here to show actually how it works if people try to apply art to these kind of narratives, to this topic, and what it actually means when an artist and survivor work closely together for a substantial period of time. And I think that the fact that all of you have shown up here tonight, despite the beautiful weather outside, suggests that you have a certain faith in the ability of graphic novels to tell a nuanced and a meaningful story, that you believe in its ability to give space to voices from the recent past that are not sufficiently present in the public domain so far. Or perhaps you're here to see if you will be won over by the eloquence of the contemporary graphic novel. Such a positive and generous approach to comics, or more generally, the notion that comics are indeed a serious medium, has not always been prevalent. Many comics traditionally, of course, revolve around humor and adventures and were considered childish, and that has strongly shaped the image of comics for quite a long time, as many of you will be aware of. As a distinct medium, comics have been on the rise, especially from the second half of the 19th century onwards. They were known earlier in large parts of Europe as so-called catch-penny prints, or the Bilderbogen, or in French, the Image d'Épinal. And those illustrated sheets quite often also focused on serious and violent topics. War was one of those themes, and its visualization mostly concerned, as you can see, the experiences of soldiers, while showing a strongly nationalistic and even hagiographic tone. Nuance in those publications was not a standard ingredient. But the medium became particularly popular in the 1930s, most of all in the United States. Here, too, many comics books took on a rather one-sided interpretation, often characterized by a very powerful patriotism. Against the backdrop of the Second World War, this led to the imaginative content in all kinds of comic books, in which one's own national identity was cast in extremely positive terms, embodied here by the very masculine superheroes, while opponents were clearly portrayed as entirely inferior. Only few readers were expecting a more balanced and reliable portrayal in this medium. Also, it seemed, because when the US finally took sides in the war, a small number of publishers decided to carve out their own niche in the very booming comic book market. And to make it clear what made their stories stand out, they used very recognizable titles, like True Comics or Real Life Comics, deliberately distinguishing themselves from the massive production of comics for children and young adults in which fantasy dominated. The approach was, above all, educational, but also here an emphatic tone of patriotism was not lacking in wartime. Once again, the emphasis was on heroes, preferably military ones. Civilians were not entirely absent, but if they were portrayed at all, they rarely represented the role of victims. That was a category that could not count on regular attention in comic book land at that time. Only gradually would comics take notice of individual experiences of war victims, or otherwise pay attention to diverse victims of mass violence and human rights violations. After the underground culture, the counterculture of the 1960s had made clear that comics were an accessible medium of social and political significance that contributed to the emancipation of various social groups, a realization emerged that comics were a medium in their own right, a medium that could present serious and realistic topics in a carefully considered way to an adult audience. Art Spiegelman, we all know his name, built very much on this, working from the 1970s on his autobiographical 2-volume Mouse that hardly needs any introduction here, I think. Traumatic history, that's what's been proved in these publications, traumatic history could be told and conveyed empathetically and convincingly in a way that also commanded admiration for the artistic merits of the combined textual and visual presentation. Although Spiegelman's famous work was explicitly non-fiction, in the slipstream of his international fame, the term graphic novel emerged. And the rest is history, one would almost think. But now, in 2025, almost 40 years after the first compilation of the Mouse chapters was published, we are still discovering what serious graphic novels can express. We are still finding out how they open up new ways of understanding, of historical understanding. We're still trying to figure out what interpretations, connections, and identifications readers derive from engaging with graphic novels. And also, we're trying to figure out where the limits of the medium's possibilities actually lie. In a world, or I should say in a changing world, also in a constantly changing media landscape, in the global village which we still try to build, but which, as we all know, is under serious pressure from many sides. I'm not going to try to outline the general development of the non-fiction graphic novel in recent decades. But it's good to note here that the initially somewhat hesitant public response to Mouse, I mean, raising the question whether it was actually justified to visualize something so terrible in comic book form, whether or not it was kind of trivialization of history. That kind of hesitant public response has transformed over the years, transformed into an increasing number of attempts also to case other genocides, other wars, other crimes against humanity in the form of a visual narrative. And here in the Netherlands, I think many readers have become familiar with educational graphic novels, the ones made by the Anne Frank Foundation, sometimes also made by the Anne Frank Fonds, about the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands, also more specifically like the second one, The Search or the Zoektocht, about the Holocaust. And also, quite well known, the biography, the visual biography of Anne Frank, Het Achterhuis. And that's not the only example. I mean, I could also point out, among many other examples, the Denkbook, so-called thinking book, that's published annually by the National Committee, May 4 and May 5, which organizes the annual World War II commemorations in the country on behalf of the Dutch government. And there are many more examples to give. But above all, I don't want to point out many more Dutch examples. I would like to draw your attention to a Canadian initiative called Narrative Art and Visual Storytelling in Holocaust and Human Rights Education, initiated by Charlotte Scallier at the University of Victoria back, I believe, in 2019. This project, this international collaboration, resulted in this graphic novel, But I Live. It's one of the various language editions that has been published so far, But I Live. And it contains 3 stories of child survivors of the Holocaust. It was published back in 2022. In it, the experiences of 4 Holocaust survivors were captured by 3 visual artists, Miriam Dibitsky, Gilad Seliktar, and Barbara Jelin. And in a rather haunting way, I would say, based on intensive contact between the survivors and the artist, a long-time contact, they visualized and strengthened the individual voices, expressing the experiences and the views of the three survivors, of David Schaffer, of Nico and Rolf Kamp, and of Emmy Arbel. And I vividly remember how deeply impressed I was when I first read that book, not least by the way in which empathy and agency were transmitted in this publication. And moreover, more recently, Barbara Jelin has also published The Color of Memory, which further explores Emmy Arbel's life story and also her connection with the artist. And these books, and I should say these award-winning books, contextualized nowadays in exhibitions, in films, and also in educational materials, have inspired a second geographically, culturally, and temporally even more comprehensive project, the survivor-centered visual narratives, in which this time five multidisciplinary research classes address related historical topics. And the variety of those projects is, I believe, quite impressive. It's going from the Holocaust to the genocide in Rwanda. It's ranging from the Yugoslav wars in the 1990s to the genocide, much more recently, of the Yazidis in Iraq. While we also focus on Turtle Island, exploring the impact of the Canadian Indian residential school system. But today we will focus specifically on one of those cases. We will be looking at the war, the civil war in Syria, which from 2011 to just a few months ago left an immense trail of destruction on an entire society and all of its citizens. It's a story of Akram, visualized by Toby. They will first introduce you to a part from the manuscript Al-Fazia, the horror, surviving Assad's prisons. After their joint reading, Charlotte Scalier will moderate the conversation with them, in which Andrea Webb and Ungur will also participate, bringing in their own historical and educational expertise. So therefore, I would like to invite the speakers and moderator to the stage.
Thank you so much, Kees, for this lovely introduction. We are very happy and delighted and grateful to be here. We'll start with a live reading with Akram and Toby first. And this is the first time in our project where a survivor is actually doing a live reading. So thank you.
First time also doing a live reading, so.
Amsterdam, 17th of February 2023. Oh shoot, I'm too late. Our first meeting at the NIOD, the Dutch Institute for War and Genocide Studies. Het spijt me, I'm sorry I'm late. No worries. Miss Kees Ribbens, Oer Angur, and Akram Al-Saud. The first time we meet in person. Good to see you. How are you doing with all that is happening? I'll be asking him this more often in the coming months. Shortly before, the Syrian-Turkish border area was hit by a severe earthquake. At this point, there are already 50,000 dead.
I'm okay. It's hard, but I'm okay.
How's your family?
They are safe, but the countryside of Aleppo and Idlib was also very damaged. It is bad.
First the revolution, then the Syrian war, the Russian bombardments, then ISIS. What's next? One would think they suffered enough. We talk a little about the situation in Syria. I'm learning some new words. Mukarabat is an important word. It means intelligence, plural. In Germany, the single institutions of Gestapo and Stasi were feared. In Syria, there are 4 secret services. When you hear that word, everyone immediately ducks under the table. If one secret service releases you, the next one can pick you up immediately afterwards. After all, you were a suspect. Mukbar, informant. Fazir, horror. Akram tells of his imprisonment.
When they tortured me for the first time.
Torture. No one has ever told me that they were tortured. He talks about it as if it were something that happens to everyone sooner or later in Syria. We agreed to meet every Friday, just the 2 of us in The Hague. We will record our conversation. In the end, it will be over 10 hours of material. 7th of June, 2023. Good to see you. It's been a while.
Yes, I thought it's nice to sit in that cafe. They have a nice lemon cake.
Shall we start then?
Okay. I was born in 1990 and grew up in Damascus. My parents are from a city called Deir ez-Zor. It's in northeastern Syria, close to Iraq. They moved to Damascus when I was 1 year old. My father was a construction worker. I think my family was considered very poor. Meanwhile, my mother didn't go to school at all, but I think she was smart. After high school, I ended up wanting to study architecture, but I couldn't study in Damascus. So then I got into Aleppo. So that's the reason why I moved there. The University of Aleppo is very famous. When I was 18 and I went there, it became my hometown. Damascus is the politically important city because the government and the regime are there. But in terms of people, traders, factories, they are in Aleppo.
Were you politically interested before?
In Syria, people don't speak about politics at all. You feel there is no one to talk to. We had to wear military uniform in schools, and everything was connected and related to the president. Praising the president and the Ba'ath Party. A few kilometers from us there was a totally different type of world. When I saw people in Lebanon took the streets, forcing Syrian troops out of the country non-violently, I started to dream about the same in Syria. But I had a tough start in Aleppo. I had no money, and I was disappointed of the city. It was more conservative than I thought. But I got the chance to live in a student room. Luckily, they were all politically interested, and I think that's why we became friends. And we were all against the regime. That was before the revolution. It was 2009. All was good until December. My mom was sick for years already. And I remember that in December, I was doing one of my projects, and she was getting very sick. We took her to the hospital, and she passed away later. It was December 2009. 2010 started. It was also normal. When I took the exams and the second semester started in March, and then...
Look, Akram, there's one guy in the office next to us. He's wearing a suit. Don't go.
Usually the ones wearing suits are members of the security intelligences.
But to imagine this, could you have done anything else at all?
You cannot run away or do anything, I said. Even if he is a security, they control, even if he is a security agent, they control Syria. I have to go. Where can I hide? So after a few questions, the guy in the suit says,
let's go together.
And his car was outside. My friend was waiting also outside, knowing that something wrong going on. We arrive at a factory-like building. I am led down some stairs. I was being checked at the desk. Then I panicked. What do you want from me?
We will take you to a mental hospital.
I couldn't believe what was going on. 30 minutes ago, I was outside with my friends and had a normal life and doing my projects. And now I'm under the ground in a cell and no light at all. I was hearing also people yelling, and they were beating them from the cells, and people were crying. Next day, they picked me up again with a Kia Rio. Where are you taking me?
To Homs. What did you do?
I did nothing.
And why are you here if you did nothing?
When I woke up, I just heard a wall of a castle or something like this. It seemed a very, very big wall is being opened. But I could only see the boots and the pants of the black military uniforms. I got the feeling we were somewhere very remote. They put me into a new cell, which is a bit bigger, cell number 2. A tiny window goes out to the place where the torture happens. I could hear them crying, and I could hear the screams. I was waiting. Then suddenly the door opens. I think it was around 12 a.m. at night. They brought someone, and he immediately went to sleep. Next day, they brought food, but I refused. It was so bad.
You better eat. You will not get better than that food.
So I felt like he has experience. He's got the experience with prison. Later, I learned that already 3 years ago, he was arrested in the same branch. Where are we in Homs right now?
No, you are in Damascus. You are in the investigation branch of the Air Force Intelligence.
Here they do all the military all the military torture. It is based in Al-Mazza military airport. It seems that they are the Air Force security agents, and they had a campaign on smugglers, and they have arrested hundreds of men there. The day after they brought someone new, and more and more. The alarm in the prison sounded like a bird sound, an ugly one. I was taken to an interrogation. Look, I mean, I'm against the regime, of course, but I didn't say that. I couldn't hear for a few seconds. You want me to confess that I'm against the regime, which I am, but I'm not sectarian, and I don't distinguish between religions. It's purely political.
Beat him.
They would take me outside and wipe my back. They also have a tool for that. So they put my legs in there and put them up, and then they start beating you that way, or to beat you from the side to control more. Then you don't have the ability to defend yourself. So this was the first time he could start beating and say he would come again. After I was brought back to the officer and said, yes, I have nothing to say. So they kept doing this. When they took me back to the cell, I think until the second day I wasn't able to move at all. Like not being able to move or stand.
Because everything was hurting?
Yes, and swollen. So I think 2 days later, they did the same. At the end, I don't remember how much of these kinds of sessions I had to take, 5 or 6.
Did you witness the torture of others?
Yes, they brought an Iraqi guy. He was already in another cell. So this is a normal feet, right? But his feet were like this.
So double the size?
Yes, completely. Yellow and dark blue. It felt like the blood was clotted inside. I'm not sure what happened to him, but he was accused of being a spy. You can imagine that guy when we saw him and Fade.
Fadi.
That guy when he saw me and Fadi. It was a very scary moment to see his body and the level of torture. And the 3 Palestinians, they were brought, and they were also covered in blood and all.
If you know what could happen to you when you saw these guys, but still you were defending yourself like you did.
Well, I don't understand how I was able to stand and to try even to reply to him.
I would have been shit scared.
I know that it was dangerous, but because of the consequences might even be worse. But yeah.
So you wanted to protect who you are?
Yes, that also. Also, you will lose why you want to survive at the end. At least for me, I mean, if you really don't, yeah, it's like the goal will be destroyed. It's not worth it.
If you change who you are, then it would have been a win for Assad also?
Yes, exactly. And then we started to receive more and more people. In 2 weeks, we became 16 people. We stayed like this for 2.5 months. The branch was packed with people. There were 18 cells, a capacity of hundreds people, and now there are 100 of people, and now there were 400 or 500. It was very hot inside the cell, but because of this big number of people, there was almost no air.
There was no window?
The smell and no bathroom, and people are not getting any showers, and we were sweating all the time.
180 centimeters.
We were allowed 2 times to go to the toilet each day, outside the cell. The guard would let you go to the toilet, and he would count to 10.
230 centimeters. Nobody can take a dump in 10 seconds. How did people react to these circumstances?
To be honest, I think for 1 month, almost 1 month, I thought I would die. You can imagine with 16 people in one tiny room, you don't feel that there is air. Then there are lice also in everyone's clothes. You cannot sleep, horrible food. And I already had a phobia of closed spaces.
2.5 months. About 75 days, 1,800 hours, 108,000 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Akram and Toby. I would like to start by inviting you, Akram, to tell us a little bit more about your work with Toby, your collaboration, creative collaboration with Toby and the project. So we'll do the panel discussion for about 40 minutes, followed by a Q&A.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being here and being interested in my story and the work of the graphic novel. Let's start about, maybe we can go to some things later, but I will start with the work we have done. I mean, after all the discussion to start this project, and I had many questions about, okay, how can a graphic novel like hold the weight of genocide or mass violence or whatever. So I had those questions in my mind, all the doubts, and also doubts about my story in particular, why my story should be drawn, and it's just a story of hundreds of thousands of Syrians who went through the same path. But after I met Toby, to be honest, it started from the beginning for me, like this series of conversations, meetings that also contain a lot of care. So what I appreciated in Toby, in the beginning, of course, I did my research, and I saw his works, but later that he didn't stand like a distance from my story. No, he was trying most of the time to come closer, trying to, let's say, collect the fragments. So I tell like something about a specific event, and then we continue to another event, and this event has also a context behind it. So he was able to, at the end, to listen very well and keep asking questions, and also stop in the middle, of course, when we needed to stop about that, and then collect all this fragments and transfer them to the drawing. So I can describe it that it was a very caring process. And what I also appreciate that he also understood that it will take a lot of time. So we need to meet and to meet again, and maybe we discuss another. We can discuss one drawing again, and he was also open to. If I try to show him also pictures of the place and how do I want it to be represented. So that's what I can say so far.
Thank you. Now, Toby, you made the artistic decision to bring your own avatar into the graphic narrative, and that scene where you try to put yourself into the shoes of Akram without absorbing Akram's story, when you try to recreate the size of one of the prison cells. Do you want to talk a little bit about that decision and what made you bring yourself into the storytelling process?
The idea came. The first thing was I need something to channel my experience and what I'm hearing. How do I bring this across to an audience? And I thought the best thing to do is maybe bring myself in as a listener, as the audience is also listening or reading the story. I don't have much background and didn't know much about Syria when we started this story, and I thought for most of the audience this is the same. So maybe this is a good way to enter as a blank page that I was, as the audience is, and but then I was challenged with Akram's stories and how do I draw them, and I remember that we were discussing this issue together, and then I had this idea, maybe this whole set up, or this whole situation of a prison cell, spending such a long time in a small place is also a horrible thing. But how to imagine to share this with 16 people? How do I do this? How do I draw this? So it was a pretty simple way of first trying to imagine how big is the cell in the first place, and then next step is picturing myself in the measurements of the cell, and the next thing would be I have to share this with 16 people. So I draw myself 16 times, which would be hard enough to experience, but then to imagine 16 strangers. So this is how it progressed, and with that I tried to get closer to the situation, but always be aware of that I could never totally depict an experience like that.
Can we talk a little bit more about how the conversation and the creative partnership unfolded? So you would start drawing sketches and then show them Akram, and Akram would provide feedback, and what happened in a situation when Akram would critique maybe the pages. Can we get a little bit more of a sense of how that working relationship was? Because it took, as you said, it took time over 2 years, so it was sustained, it was very caring, and it was incredibly thoughtful, and it was really about relationship and about trust. So if you both could speak a little bit more about that would be great.
First, I was quite impressed about Akram, how chronologically he could tell his story. So I thought I'd just let him talk. Sometimes ask a question, but that was the start of it. Really listening and trying to get to grasp his whole story first, and record it all the time. As I said, it was on over 10 hours of material. And then we started. I tried to figure to narrow this 10 hours into a sort of a compact story, and this is the first draft that I showed you then.
I mean, for me, I don't think I had really clear vision. I mean, as I said, I mean, I checked the former work of Toby, and I liked them. But still, when we started, I couldn't imagine how my story or any story related to Syria or prisons in Syria can be represented that way. But we started, as Toby said, so we would sitting in a normal cafe, but also recording the conversation from the beginning. And then usually I talk, then later Toby will ask me some questions that were interested or to fill some gaps or something. And I think that was, we took several sessions like this before he started drawing anything. Later, we tried also to, as I said, because there was Karen in this process, so to also, Toby was open if I share videos related to a specific event, if I was describing how was, because the situation in Syria was changing like year by year since the beginning of the revolution. And those stages also I lived through them. So I was sharing also videos, pictures, sometimes personal issues, and some other times could be like general ones. And he was very open in learning more. We reached even the level of what type of, let's say, building materials in Aleppo. If he wanted also to know, okay, if I wanted to draw something and this neighborhood is in Aleppo, how the color, what type of neighborhoods and buildings. So it wasn't even about details of my story, but also details of Syria in general. And that's why it required all this time.
Thank you. Now, Ur, I have a question for you. If I may share, you were a little bit skeptical at the beginning about the use of graphic art, comics, in tackling such a complex, difficult, multifaceted story. Do you want to speak a little bit about that, but also about, of course, your important role in the project as a historian, the liaison for Akram to the project. But I learned from you about the use of camera as an instrument of coercion and how drawing can bring a pathway to connect meaningfully and deeply with stories in a way maybe that a more traditional oral history interview cannot accomplish. Do you want to speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you, Toby and Akram. That's incredibly powerful. It's also the first time I'm hearing them presented this way. And so, yes, I mean, I will confess, I was in the beginning, I was a skeptic, thinking a topic as heavy as genocide, and also the difficulties in representing genocide. So the three levels of silences built into the Assad regime's a system of mass torture, mass disappearances, mass executions, as in it is difficult to represent things in the country. It was already difficult to do that in the regime, under the regime for 50 plus years. Then second, once you are actually in Syria, then the one topic that you will never be able to represent properly is the prison system. The great paradox in the Assad regime is the prison system has an incredible impact on Syrian society, immensely disproportionate impact on Syrian society, and yet it is the least understood. It is a kind of a black box of ignorance and fear, of paranoia that really gripped that society. And then at the individual level as well, you know, no Syrian was ever invited to tell their stories this way. It was not inside Syria and also not outside Syria. Recommended, stimulated, or motivated people to to write down their stories. And there are people here, for example, in the Netherlands, who are survivors of some of these same prisons, who never were approached or asked, hey, what did you experience in the exact same prisons that Akram went through? So, and to break through these three, let's say, barriers of silence, I thought, our graphic novel is going to do that. And then gradually, as this cooperation proceeded, I thought maybe this is exactly the way to do it, because the classic way to do it was to take survivors, put them in front of a camera, and just let them speak, right? But that in itself often is so intrusive for people who have survived these kind of totalitarian societies, like Syria under Assad or Iraq under Saddam Hussein, that the camera in itself is a major intervention, actually. And actually, it wasn't even a tool of repression because of the state media, right? So it kind of, that shattered my assumptions quite a bit. And also because I think that, I'm an academic, I'm a historian, sociologist. Sometimes we have the arrogance to think that academic research can really reach into all the corners of human experience. And that's simply not the case. You simply have, you need art, you need literature, you need film, you need music, you need other forms of representation to really represent that human experience. And I think that's exactly what we have here. Not only what's in the panels, but also what's not said, what's in between the panels. So what they leave to our imagination, I think that's really powerful here.
Before I ask Andy about the development of teaching resources, I want to speak about representation of violence, because I could imagine that in itself is a very critical part, and everything's falling apart. So you must have had discussions about how to represent violence, because it's a very deeply violent story, and I read that in the 100 pages of recorded testimony, and it's very difficult to comprehend, process, and to bear witness to that process. So the question is, how did you make the selection in consultation with Akram, what goes into the graphic novel, but also what discussions did you have about what can be shown and what not? And then I would like Andy's feedback from an educator, teacher-educator's perspective, when we want to bring these stories into the high school, middle school, high school classroom. What are some of the concerns or some of the parameters that we need to be mindful of?
Yeah, what really helped was these webinars that we had with the whole team, talking about how do we keep the dignity of the people we interview, and when we want to show what has been done to them, how do we achieve that and not traumatizing them again or humiliate them again through a drawing. We didn't want to do that, of course, and my approach was not showing the actual act of violence, but I discussed this also with Akram, how he feels about it, and what is this okay in a way? But there's still the effects of the violence are clearly shown. But as far as I understood you, it's your main goal was also to tell about what's going on.
So I can start with why I accepted at the end, because I was also a skeptic as Ur. And I think I said that before. I was reading later after Ur introduced the idea of the project and everything, and asked me, why not your story in this book? And I read a book by a Syrian writer, and it was called The Horror and Its Representation. Okay, it was from Yasser Saleh as a political a prisoner in Syria for 16 years. So he was talking about the relationship between Syrians individuals, communities, and Syria in general with the Syrian regime, and how he argues that it's all based on torture on all those levels. But at the end of the book, he was talking about how to represent that horror. And he was suggesting that maybe art can fill this gap between showing everything, all the blood and dead bodies, and then we ended up with not really mobilizing people, but numbing them instead, or just hiding everything. So he suggested that maybe type of arts can work. That's how I accepted that idea. At the end, I was convinced by that, and that's why we tried also, me and Toby, also how to show a specific things in the because in the prison, the story based on Syrian prison, that means torture would be there, beaten. But if I can say something about one of the drawings, for example, so Toby I found it smart way, like he showed the kind of the beating, but through a telephone, like I'm showing him the phone, so it was far from your eye. So, and this kind of tactics, I mean, I have to say I'm not the artist here, and I don't have always a solution. Sometimes I tell my feelings toward something, and Toby at the end, let's say, tried always to find a way how to make it proper.
Now, Andy, you're in charge of the educational component of the project. Andy is the co-director on our Survivor Center Visual Narratives project. So you take the lead on grading, spearheading the development of the teaching resources, not just for Canada, but also within an international, culturally sensitive context. Do you want to speak a little bit about that, how you envision this work, bringing it into different national contexts, but also how the issue of violence, how that can be done in a trauma-informed way?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that is particularly challenging is that we have to be honest, right? We have to be honest about the situation and what happened and what continues to happen in some contexts in other parts of our project. So it does have to be represented, but it doesn't necessarily have to be graphic. And I think that is where we also have to trust the educators that we are working with in each of these contexts to provide well-researched supplemental materials if they would like to as well. And I think that's part of the place of the historians and the scholars who are part of our project as well, because they bring in that expertise and they are able to share some of those. But I also feel that this becomes a very personal story, right? The part of the way, or the reason that we are engaging young people with graphics when we are teaching this is that it very much personalizes the narratives. They have to engage with an individual's story, and in many cases more than one individual, because the artist and the survivor are working together in this conversation, and so they are brought into a very active role that the students are very engaged in the process of reading. They aren't passive recipients of the testimony, they're very actively engaged. So we then have to trust the educators that we are working with in all of these contexts to provide the most appropriate time, place, and supports to bring those into classrooms. And my experience obviously is in the Canadian context, and I work a lot with Canadian teachers who are increasingly having a mandate, a provincial mandate, or we don't have a national system, so a provincial mandate to teach about genocide, generally for senior secondary students, but there are no resources to help them to do that. So being able to provide trauma-informed education resources that are freely available and accessible online through our portals is one of the most important and powerful things that we can do, and then also be able to make suggestions or opportunities for them to engage in other materials to supplement through the expertise that's in the project.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Andy. I want to ask you another question, and also Akram, because you went back to Syria after the fall of the Assad regime, and you told me that this graphic novel could not have been distributed in Syria prior to the fall of the regime, so it would have had to have a digital version and VPN, which was really worrisome for the project as a whole, because it would have endangered Akram, would have endangered Toby as well. So do you want to speak? You went back to these sites of torture. I don't know, would it be okay to talk about that? And I know, Ur, you had specific questions for Akram as well. On the note of going back to these sites. And of course this had it had an impact on you too, because suddenly you saw that you had an image of what the cell looked like, and I think which led to the graphic novel having a new ending. So if you could speak about that a little bit more.
Yes, I went to Syria, I think, the end of March this year, so just 3 months ago. Unfortunately, I only saw those prisons from outside. So before I went to Syria, I mean, my plan was, I was convinced that once I'm in Syria, I will try to visit at least the military airport in Al-Mazza. But at that time, there were two things going on in Syria, but the main one is that people, because, you know, I was released, but there is at least 140,000 people who disappeared in those prisons. So prisons are still considered as, crime scene. And that's why many families of the detainees asked to be protected, and not, people weren't allowed actually. And maybe I could find a chance to enter, but I also wanted to respect that. I mean, my personal desire here, I didn't, okay, before I wanted to enter, but I thought maybe there will be time next time they will allow us in a better way than destroying any evidence on the ground. So yeah, at this time I couldn't enter. But I mean, I saw them from outside, and it was already. I don't have a good word to describe it, but it just felt like a dream. Because some of them, when they took me to those prisons, I didn't know that there is a prison in that area. So now, knowing that I walked in that street, and I know that this is the gate I talked about, they said, like when I felt like it's a castle gate, I just walked in front of it, and I knew what it is behind it. But it was a good feeling that I know that there are no prisoners, at least at that prison, at that moment. Yeah.
Yeah, I have so many questions for Akram, because when the regime fell, this is something that was relatively unexpected. So, for example, maybe one question to Akram, even to Toby. The main news that came out out of Syria on the 8th of October, when Assad fled to Moscow and the regime basically collapsed and imploded, was the images of the prisons that were opened. You saw the rebels with big hammers breaking open the prison cells and people flowing out. So maybe a question to Akram, like how did you feel when you watched that? Like what image did you have of that? And second, what is your expectation that now should happen with these crime scenes? Right. So what should? But the country has a vast archipelago, or a veritable gulag of prison sites, and very often it's former detainees who have the right to say something about it, or what should happen to it, right? So that's maybe these two questions. And maybe to Toby, does it matter? Because one of the reasons the graphic novel format was so great is because it was impossible to walk in Syria, and to even, just as a citizen, walking in a street, looking at a prison site was already, you're going to be inside that prison within a few minutes, right? It was impossible to photograph. There are no photos. There's no other representation. There are some detainees who drew former detainees who drew images. So all we had was the scant material. Now the regime has collapsed, and everybody's walking around. There are these vloggers from the UK and from Germany walking around in Saidnaya prison taking selfies. So does that change anything to the graphic novel?
So exactly as you said, so I saw a video, I think the same night or the night after of the fall of the regime. I saw a video of the prison inside Al-Mazza military airport. Actually, the first thing I did is just send it to Toby. That was, I mean, even before I showed it to my partner, or something, because it was for 2 years we were talking about this and how it was inside, and I was describing that. So the first thing when I saw, I recognized it immediately without even. I mean, there was a description. The video was, I found it on Twitter. I knew that this is the hallway, and this is a video from the military airport. So yeah, it was at night, and I shared that with Sophie. So.
And I was, at this moment, I was actually working on the page where you first entered that hall. So it's that was really mind-blowing, really, that this all came together at this moment.
About what should we do with those prisons? I mean, it's a discussion that is going on already in Syria. People are afraid because they don't know, okay, the new administration, what do justice means to them? Do they care about, okay, the collective memory or not? But I mean, for me, I mean, if the decision, I don't have concrete ideas, but I think they should contribute, like they should be part of the building new memory, like not building new memory, but building the collective memory of the Syrians about what happened in Syria since 1963 till now. So we should protect them, and they shouldn't be used as prisons anymore. And of course, that should happen also after if we can gather any evidence for the families of the detainees. So after that, they should be protected and open for people to enter and see. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, it's. I see a connection here with German history and of course other historical events. I think it should be preserved to remind us to what mankind is capable of. When you sent me these images, it was quite striking because before I only had these models that are on Amnesty International, but not really an image of it. And as part of the process, as we discussed, I tried to lay out the measurements of the cell, and all of a sudden there's an actual image of one of these cells. So the only thing I could do was put it into the process, and the picture that I drew, that I still had to draw of all these people in the cell, I could draw from reality all of a sudden, not just from the description. I could locate where was the window and how did the window look like. So that the whole thing, constantly learning, getting new information. I would always put it in there, but of course, at a certain moment, there is the moment when a book has to become a book, and we can't change anything anymore. But we try to get anything that we learned until so far to put it in there.
Now, before we open it up for questions from the audience, Andy, I wanted to ask you the question of the project is survivor-centered. So from a pedagogical point of view, why is it so important to retain the authenticity, the integrity, and the humanity of a survivor's voice?
I think one of the things that I mean, we've talked about this so much, is the idea of the power of an individual's story. And, you give large numbers of people, and when we talk to young people, I think we need to have both of those things in concert with each other, right? So that we understand the massive scale, but we also understand a human individual who is at the heart of this particular narrative, because that connection, with the very human connection with a person, is what gives that a profound sense of meaning, especially for young people. And we are in a society, of course, where we all age, and we have to be prepared for a post-survivor world where those individual stories are still need to be there, so that they don't get lost in the large-scale numbers.
Thank you, Andy. Now we're happy to receive questions from the audience, and there's already one gentleman asking a question in the green shirt. Can you wait for the microphone, because we have an online audience and they won't hear you without the mic.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's a powerful story, and Akram, that was very brave to tell the story. So obviously, we live in this society, and we live far, far away from many, many individuals. And I like your point about individuals, but hundreds and thousands of people are dying like every day. If you call it was Syria and now Gaza and Iran and Israel and Yemen and Sudan and there, all these places, there are a lot of survivors. Survivors are everywhere. If we are looking from the West perspective on all these stories, we just hear on the news 100 people died in a bomb, 150 people, like a building collapsed on their heads. You hear just numbers. You do not hear individuals. So we got some kind of news fatigue, where you cannot distinguish or have the connection that these are, every one of them is a survivor, every one of them has a story. Then my question here comes to you, Toby. What drew you to this individual, which is a very brave, very powerful story? What attracted you to this individual to unbox this story and tell it to the world? Thank you.
When Charlotte approached me, I was busy working on a story of my family history about Second World War, and it is a story of a typical, how to say that, typical German family who tried everything to survive through the dangers of the regime, support as much as they could to their moral standards, but try to find a way in these difficult times. But I realized that this is a story of the past. I also see a lot of things to compare with our times. But I found it very important to tell a story about nowadays also, because this story about my family I started to draw because people were complaining about how in Europe about how bad everything is, and there was talk about the refugee crisis. And I was realizing how can we blame these people from fleeing from war when there is a refugee story in almost every German family. So I thought maybe it's a way to show the way we made since these bad times, but also through this project focus on what is happening now. what Akram told me, I found very shocking when he, after all the horror he's been through, he started to study in the Netherlands, and nobody was interested in his story. Everybody's complaining about people coming to our countries because they are fleeing from war, but nobody's asking why are they fleeing. So this is the main reason why I wanted to take part in this project. I felt it was an honor for an important cause, but I also see the problem that there are so many stories, and this is how the story in a way ends as well, the first draft of the story, that there are still millions of stories that need to be told in a way. But only if we tell them, people will understand what the impact really is of all these terrible news.
Yes, Dinke? Dinke Hundius.
Thank you very much. I am very impressed with the presentation. But I would like to know how you got out, Akram. We were taken so much into the story, and now I want to know how you got here. What happened after?
Or said you have to read the book, but yes. I mean, I was arrested. That was the first time. I was arrested later 3 times. That was before the revolution. Then after the revolution, I was arrested other 3 times. I still ask myself why they released me, and why I was released at the end. I don't know. But the first time I stayed 9 months, something like this. So, I mean, it went through different stages. At the end, the court, and I was released just before the revolution. So, and this, I mean, being in prison at that time was the reason, or main reason, or the big motivation to participate 4 months after they released me into the Syrian revolution. So I was released in December 2010. Few months later, the revolution started. So, yeah.
Yes.
Hi. Thank you again, Akram. I think it's very brave of you to share such a personal story. My question is, how was it for you emotionally to go through this process of telling your story again and bringing this unpleasant memories? And also, did you feel like when you seeing your story visualized like this and that you survived despite everything they did, is that like a form of justice for you?
To be honest, I used to tell some part. Once I participated in a project, I think you were part of it, and we were used to go to school and we use our stories, but that was just short, like you just give a general image. And I think with I told Toby once that I told him stories about the prison. I never told my partner, never told my family, never told my father, who passed away a few months ago. I never told any one of them at all. I think what made me feel, I don't know, the feeling to hold on or something, or to stay strong, is that the idea behind it, I have to say. Maybe it's real, or I'm telling myself that to stay strong, but because my feeling was just because I'm doing it for a reason. For me, it's an important reason. So I was able to, because in normal life, so as I said, so the story, or I told Toby things that I would never, let's say, tell maybe my grandchildren later, but not the ones who are, I have contact with them every day, and then they will think, okay, that happened to you, and you went through this, and I cannot handle that, I have to say. But for the book and for the cause, I felt like I can do that.
And what about the question about justice?
To be honest, I felt already being released the first time. So justice, of course, it's so many levels, but this is one of them, of course. When I was in, there is a part that when I was saying that in the first 1 month I'm almost going to die, and this is how I felt. I wasn't able to eat. The circumstances and being interrogated every 2 days at a time. The thing that changed or switched my mind is that, okay, I realized that that's what they want. And I need to stay, they want to break me, so I need to break their will somehow. So being released at the time without, and being able to do something after that, that was for me justice. Then the revolution, when it started, it was huge, and this is another stage, of course, or another part or chapter.
Yep. Was it the lady in the black top? But both of you have black tops. First, and then you, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your story, and I think the beginning was very powerful. How you both together told the story. Maybe it also it showed really, I think, how this is a story of two people. You worked on it together, and I'm very curious to hear from you, Akram, if you feel this is really your story, if you feel Toby is in it maybe, and what that does to your story. And also for Toby, the stories you've told before are really personal. This is someone else's story. So how do you cope with your perspective, your identity in visualizing someone else's story?
No, I see myself in the story. So it is. This was also one of my concerns about the project in general. At the end of the project, am I going to recognize myself in the story and everything? No, I see myself, and I'm very. I really like it, and I also appreciate. I mean, so it has different. So sometimes it feels like you are in the story, and sometimes you have just to zoom out here where you see me and Toby, and I also like that, because that was going. It's my story, but also the story of the work of 2 years so far, and Toby was a very important part of it, and he was the one who was making it real. So it's two things together. It's the story of the past 14 years, at least for me, or at least the years in Syria, and then the story of me and Toby after we met in February 2023.
Yeah, totally agree to this, because it's every time I went to The Hague, it was I was preparing myself to hear these stories, but the time that I spent with Akram was my lifetime as well, so it is also my story. But I also had problems in the beginning. So how do I represent myself? Shouldn't I take? This is about Akram. I shouldn't take too much space in it. But on the other hand, what I told earlier, we need some person. Or the reader needs one to reflect on what's going on. So that was my part in the story. If you would like to I can show some pictures. This is where we met, and this is how it went. Like, this was a discussion at NIOD, and when we were filming a documentary and talking about the events, we got to constantly to more detail. When I drew something and I showed this to Akram, we could deepen in on the story, because there was, with everything that I put on paper, new questions arose. So that's always also very helpful.
And I think that the relational aspect is very important, because, as you said, you started to draw, and then based on the drawing, showed the drawing back to Akram, you asked questions, and then you adapted the drawing, modified the drawing. So it was an ongoing process.
Also, how we are going to draw ourselves, and we ended up to a very limited, simple drawing to make it for the reader possible to relate, which is. This would be notes from the conversation, the size of the cell, or how Akram would look like when he was freed from the prison, things like that. And later on, I made a storyboard, and on these storyboards we also made notes and depth, and how do you say this? How do you say that? Get more into the deep depths of the story, put it in more detail. Some background information is on there that will not fit in the story, but that will be useful information for the researchers.
Do you want to quickly talk about choice of coloration? Because he could have gone monochromatic, but in the end used quite vivid colors.
The reason for that was that I had to clarify the situations. The situation in the cafe where we were sitting was totally different than the reality of a prison cell. Also with the light, so I had to. Usually my comics are black and white, but I thought for this story I need to work in color.
Thank you. You also had a question, and Dinke, I can only pick you unless somebody else has a question who hasn't asked one yet. There's a yes.
Thank you very much. I had a question about whether you were given, Toby and Akram, whether you were given certain criteria, or maybe Toby, for the story, like some artistic criteria or the narrative, like certain boundaries within which you had to tell the story, or were you given all the artistic freedom to tell whatever you wanted to tell about Akram's story?
The only limit was 30 pages in the beginning.
But we got additional funding,
yes,
and were able to expand.
I thought this is impossible to tell, to draw this in 30 pages. I could draw a full-size graphic novel. There are so many stories we were not able to tell in this one. But I was very glad that there was additional funding, so it's going to be 72 pages. But further, there were no restrictions, or which is a very powerful thing of this concept, to leave it up to us to see what evolves from our cooperation. So we really had we were open to do anything we want.
And we should say the historians supporting without interfering.
Of course. Yeah, that would, of course, that was very helpful to have a backup, especially for someone like me who doesn't know much about the backgrounds, that we could rely on you and fact check as well.
Are the audience members having questions? Kees, and then the last question then to Dinke. Yeah, Kees, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, my question actually looks a bit forward. I was wondering if you have any thoughts or expectations about the public perception of the graphic novel once it will be published. On the one hand, I'm thinking about what Uro already referred to. I mean, there are all kinds of videos, vlogs available that have shown the prisons, but very much, I think, without a clear narrative. On the other hand, what do people know and what do people expect about Syrian history? I mean, especially I'm thinking about readers here in Western Europe. I mean, there's, of course, an established memory culture of, for instance, the Second World War. There's also where a lot of graphic novels about the Second World War and the Holocaust kind of fit in, if I may put it that way. But how do you think it will work for this graphic novel focusing on the Syrian system of prisons?
I mean, I believe, I think in my story we didn't talk about the history of Syria or something. We talked about one individual story and some events that were around it. But I believe and I hope that if this story was interesting for people here, that will also encourage them to learn and to ask about the history. And that's my hope regarding that. So it could be the tool that motivate them to understand more why Syria has 18 security agencies, why it had this long history of dictatorship. Almost half of the Syria was independent since 1946. So half of this part was controlled by the Assad family. So maybe those events inside the story can motivate people to do a research about the history of Syria.
And will you have the challenge of condensing Syrian history in an accompanying essay, bringing specificity and complexity without, going too much into detail, because this needs to go into the classroom as well. How are you dealing with that challenge of providing some of the context, honoring the survivor voice, but providing a little bit more historical context for the average Canadian students who may know very little about Syria?
I mean, first of all, I think that, for example, what Toby says, that you don't necessarily need to know about Syria to understand Syria. So if you have, for example, from your living memory, you have stories, memoirs, research book, documentaries that you have, for example, read or seen about the Stasi, for example, in the DDR. If you understand the Stasi in the DDR, you kind of understand the Mukhawarat in Syria as well, to some extent. The levels of violence, they're higher in Syria, of course, but it's not that if you don't know anything about this Arab majority country in the Middle East that you don't understand it. So you don't have to know everything to understand something, right? So, and the challenge was always, and this is a really interesting kind of contrast with the book that I co-authored with Jabir Bekr, Syrian Gulag, which is a thick book, which was, I think, rightly criticized as being tedious, as being, piling on stories and stories and stories of torture, and yet another branch, and yet another torture, and yet another. So, and after a while, people, of course, they check out, right? That's exactly what the gentleman over here said, that the people check out of these stories. There's no human empathy that's enough to encompass this, all of this. So, in a way, I think that whether it's the historical essay in front of it, there's the minimum of things you need to know about Syria. And if you need to know one thing about Assad Syria, then it's the word mukhawarat, intelligence, because it was an intelligence state that kept track on its citizens. It's the intelligence that arrested people. It's the intelligence that tortured people, that disappeared people, 140,000 people. That's all intelligence. So, but in a way, I also see this graphic novel as, yes, it's about Ekrem, but in a way, it's also about those 140,000 people, right? Because, yes, everybody's story is different, and yet they are so similar, right?
One second, I just quickly want to ask Andy, from a pedagogical educational point of view, how that's also very relevant.
Yeah, I think that actually is hugely impactful because the story becomes a way into a group of people who may not have the background knowledge, but it also then can be contextualized, right? So that there is this way in through a very personal relationship. Because we know that young people, when they're reading graphics, they connect with the protagonists. That is the way that they start to understand the story, and so they are connecting with our two storytellers in this particular graphic narrative. But it becomes the door that opens up to more historical information, more contextual information, more understanding of a particular topic. And we have always taken the approach that the education materials are for human rights, that we are inherently hopeful that dealing with many of these traumatic topics in a way that tells the stories, opens it up to the history, but also is hopeful that young people can hopefully do better than has been done in the past.
Do I get a sign that we need to wrap up? One more question? Then I have to go. Oh, okay. There's one audience member who hadn't had a chance to ask a question. It's you. You get the last one. Yeah. Sorry.
Yes,
we're still sticking around, so you can ask a follow-up question.
About context. Do you consider to supply the reader with context within the book, or in what way or not? It can be a choice which is both understandable, but what are you doing with the context?
The book will have a preface, and there will be an historical introduction or historical background, so things you need to know to understand this particular story. I think all of the books will have that.
Yes, and also an essay by Akram, and an essay or a drawing piece, creative piece by Toby about how this project came about. So it's that meta level, that the making of, and also a reflection on the work we have been doing with one another. So the reader is aware.
Maps also.
There will be maps. We entered several maps. So, and then gives a larger understanding of the work, the participatory work that went into that. So it's not just the graphic novel, but of the graphic narrative is the center stage, and the other pieces will accompany it. And that's the approach we've selected for all graphic novels, adapted to the circumstances and the needs of each cluster, which is slightly different. Do you want to?
What about further reading? There will be also further reading, right? So people were interested in, let's say you're interested in this aspect more or that aspect more, then there will be a list of readings as well.
Yeah, but the focus is on self-documentation, so we won't show perpetrator imagery or atrocity imagery in any of the books. So back to your case to wrap it all up.
In a very short time, because I think we only have like 30 seconds left. Most of all, I would like to express my thanks once again. Most of all, I think I'm repeating most of all the time. First of all, to Akram and Toby, but definitely also to Charlotte, to Ur, and to Andy. I think you did a great job. You made me very curious. I'm quite sure I'm not the only one who's very curious and cannot really wait to see when this book will be published. And I do hope to see you back either as readers of one of the graphic novels within this project, or as one of the attendees in hopefully one of the upcoming meetings about this topic. So thank you very much, and please feel free to join us for the reception that will take place here now as well. Thanks again.